We started a couple of podcast series, and again, this month we're hosting a mini podcast where we're going to talk about two maturity models. So you get two maturity models for the price of one. Obviously, you're joining this podcast for OWASP SAMM, Software Assurance Maturity Model. But there is this other maturity model, DevSecOps maturity model, and you might wonder what's the difference, what's the overlap, how they work, and just to give you a little bit of a very high level overview of how SAMM and DSOMM relate to each other. This is very abstract, and so there's way more detail, and there's lots of talks on SAMM and on DSOMM. Also, we had one last conference in Washington, which I highly recommend. We should probably also include the link on this for this particular talk in the show notes. But very high level, you have information security. A subset of that is cybersecurity. Then a smaller subset of that is related to application security. And then you have what we call a secure software development lifecycle. How SAMM and DSOMM relate to each other. SAMM is more general on application, so software assurance maturity model, regardless of the implementation paradigm and the technology being used. It's quite agnostic to that. DSOMM is specifically a maturity model. It's also a maturity model for DevSecOps way of working. And so it's in that way a little bit of a subset, but it's in a much more granular way linked to activities that you typically would encounter in DevSecOps or DevOps way of working, where some can be used for waterfall, can be used for agile, can be used for DevOps, or even any other way of development. Timo, I hope that this is sort of like a correct representation. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, nothing to it. I'm currently stuck with getting my video working, but
I see that.
failing on it.
I don't see you. Yes, indeed. But we do hear you, Timo.
Can we make a pause here and try and figure out Timo's video thing? I've made him a co-host and everything, but
I can try to join with another browser. Maybe that will work.
Okay.
It might be a security issue. Well, let's indeed. So it's a small break. I will cut this part out of the podcast and try to get Timo with his camera working.
It could be that first link he joined took over the camera. Now it's not working.
See. All right. Nariman, you arrived home.
We have some. Oh yes, there you are. We have someone with an avatar. We are weary of this kind of thing. Can we get a hi from Leonardo to make sure everything's all right? Leonardo, are you there? Okay. He's writing on the chat. He says, oops, hi.
Okay.
Okay, let's...
Timo, are you... is it working with the camera, or are we just going to do audio?
No, it's working now. You can see me, right?
There you are. Yes. Hello. Okay.
Hello. See you in person. Yes.
Yes, that's always better. So we're going to start as of this moment again. So Timo, I've just explained a little bit the context of how SAMM and DSOMM are related to each other in a very high abstract level. And I just wanted to ask you, is there anything you want to add to that before we dive in a couple of questions? We do assume for I would say participants or listeners to this podcast that you have some prior knowledge of SAMM and DSOMM. And so the goal is not to explain in DSOMM what they are, because otherwise we'll probably each need a half an hour to explain everything in detail. That's not the goal.
All right.
But okay, well, let's go and
I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
The graphic is correct, but I mean but maybe we can add is that DSOMM also has a mapping to the ISO standard. So it's not covering it, right? But at least you have a mapping for that specific part. For the secure software development lifecycle, you get something in hand for this. Yeah, it might be an addition.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Great. Well, for this podcast, we also have other people that are joining us from the SAMM team. Timo, you're representing DSOMM, but to counter that, we need lots more people from the SAMM team. So we have Nariman, we have John, and we even have Maxime in the background from the team who are listening in and can also maybe provide their views on SAMM and DSOMM. You're joining because you're obviously also the creator, but also I would say the subject matter expert on DSOMM. And we have a couple of questions. Actually, it's Adam who prepared the questions before the call or the podcast, but unfortunately he cannot make it. He is super busy with a lot of other stuff. What he had in question in mind in terms of question or how to compare SAMM. Within OWASP SAMM, we have quite, I would say, strict maturity levels. We have level 1, which is implementing a certain practice to an ad hoc level. Level 2 is making it more efficient, aligned to applications or systems or the program within the context of the security practice. And level 3 is having feedback loops and becoming, I would say, very mature in doing that security practice. But those levels are in the model quite strictly aligned on questions that check not only the quality, but also quantitatively in how far you're applying the security practice. I understand that DSOMM has a little bit more of a, I would say, flexible way of implementing maturity levels. Maybe with your background, obviously, can you explain a little bit the difference on how DSOMM maturity levels work versus SAMM maturity levels?
I think SAMM is focused on being very structured, I would say, while in DSOMM you have specific categories, or I call it dimensions, and in that dimensions you have activities for that, and that can lead to there are areas where you don't have activities. That is not something you find in SAMM, right? You will always have a description for each practice you have there. So I would say that that's a big difference. And also, depending on how you want to use DSOMM, if you use it to benchmark, it is as strict as SAMM, but often it is also used to adjust it in the company. So you have a company, you use it as a base for your application security program, and then move the activities around. And I feel that is a benefit you have from DSOMM, which is hard to get from SAMM, because SAMM is more focused on the benchmark part.
Indeed. Well, it's a little bit more rigid in the way that if you're not specifically performing the activities as defined within SAMM and prescribed in SAMM, then it's very hard to achieve higher levels of maturity. There's a certain expectation in those underlying levels. And also the way SAMM is being implemented, but also I would say Nariman and John maybe can also complement that. You work towards this level of maturity, but there's always it stays between 0 and 3. There's not something that this is a target and then we're working towards that target and achieving that as 100%. You're working towards a certain SAMM-based maturity level. I don't know, Nariman, if you can add something to that, I would say how the levels of maturity of SAMM and or DSOMM work and how they relate to each other or not.
Yeah, so I can talk for the SAMM part, let's say more. I know DSOMM theoretically, but in practice, didn't have chance to use it at scale in companies. But when I look at some maturity levels, they actually represent activities and how well you do them, or how broad the scope that you apply that activity to. And we say that it's very different from, let's say, process maturity, where where you can say how mature is the process itself. Is it initial? Is it a more established process, or are you learning from this process? So SAMM seems to target on actual activity itself rather than focusing on how much is process itself. So then at level 1, it would say you should be doing these couple of activities, which are very basic activities. And level 2, it would say, are you doing another set of activities which is a bit more advanced, and level 3 is yet another more difficult activities. So for me and SAMM, they collect, let's say, each level is a kind of set of activities for most of the questions, let's say. Of course, it's a bit also a mixture where it makes sense. Our maturity levels represent a bit different things, right? Sometimes, or criteria. Sometimes it's about what is coverage. Sometimes it represents how well the activity done. So I'm curious, like, what will be on DSOMM side? Like, is it consistently representing the maturity of activity, or you consistently picking for level 1 very basic things to do for DevSecOps, and for level 2 like more advanced controls, and level 3 even like most difficult or most expert controls? Maybe if Timo can share with that.
Yeah, I like that you talked about processes, and there are limits in DSOMM in general how to when it comes to processes. But I would say it covers the activities of a process. Maybe that is something we can I can describe is when you do, for example, dynamic application security testing. You start with a simple scan in DSOMM, and then it grows that you need to add authentication parts, that you need to add different crawlers. So you get more information of how to implement it. But which is also part of a process, but the process of implementing it in the company, that is something different, which DSOMM is not covering.
Okay, so in that way, DSOMM and SAMM are alike, but it's more like on the, and that's definitely what I've seen. And like Nariman, obviously, I've way more experience with SAMM, but SAMM is more generic, if I might say, in terms of activity descriptions, where the DSOMM activities are way more aligned with very specific activities that are aligned with DevOps activities. But from your earlier explanation, Timo, I understood that in some levels there are no activities described, while in others there are.
What I mean is that you have some white spots where there are no activities. Correct. I mean that are very little, right? But there are some where it didn't make sense to me to add an activity just to have something there. So then it's blank.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Nariman, you wanted to add something to that?
Yes, because on this topic, I have been giving some thoughts, like what do we mean by process maturity, or let's say maturity of SSTLC, because I had to deal with NIS2 a couple of assessments recently. And when I look at Dutch government's control framework or document they provide for assessing NIS2, they are talking about process maturity assessment rather than actual activity maturity, like in a SAMM. I saw a very big difference between those control frameworks. At NIS2, they have a topic, they have a control, and they say, like, you can measure it from 1 to 5, and you use MVI, the 1 to 5 one, CMMI, sorry. And for each control, the question is how mature is that control? Is it at the basic level? Are you doing it? Do you see some on ad hoc basis? Do you see it on structural basis? Or is it continuously being improved? But when I look at SAMM, it's actual list of activity that we expect them to do. So the approach is very different in at the government published NIS2, let's say, assessment framework that I evaluated, and how we do it with the SAMM.
Yeah.
And
maybe before we go to the next question, we also have John Ellingsworth, who is part of the podcast. So, John, is there anything that we might have not have covered, or do you have any extra aspects to add to this?
Well, I think it was mentioned earlier a little bit about SAMM. The term rigidity was used. I'm not sure who used it, but
that was me.
Yeah, so I don't disagree that can be part of it, and maybe DSOMM has a little bit of benefit when it offers that, what we might call flexibility or even contextual. But I think at the same time, that rigidity, or at least the fact that there is this really prescriptive detail in each practice and activity that is in SAMM, makes it easier for an organization to benchmark against other peers. Particularly CISOs and leadership are really, I think, intrigued by the ability to compare what they're doing and where they're at against peers in their industry. And I think that that's really an important consideration, especially not just, there's also auditors and regulatory frameworks where that might come into play. I'm not familiar with all the European kind of frameworks that might come into play, but we've certainly done a lot of mappings from SAMM to those other control frameworks that allow us to see that. And then it allows, I think, and again, I will have to maybe lean on Timo to provide clarity on where I might misrepresent it. But with SAMM and those mappings, we can allow third-party assessors to understand how well an organization is doing if they're just using SAMM, but not embarking or focusing on those other regulatory frameworks. So I think that's the benchmarking and comparison against other control sets is a positive. I also, with SAMM, we provide a very clear progression path of how to get from level 1 to level 2. The quality criteria that's defined to understand whether or not you're meeting that level's maturity is very it's very prescriptive, right? It's very detailed, and I think that's an incredibly valuable aspect of SAMM. It also, from an organizational planning perspective, it allows you to do your resource planning and budgeting against those targets that you identify, I think, really readily. And so I would just say, with the fixed kind of rigid, and I'm just repeating rigid, but I think it allows for more precise planning capabilities within an organization.
Okay, thank you for adding that. So let's maybe, in terms of timing, go to the next question. It is more a generic question, so it's not so much SAMM or DSOMM related, but I don't know what version of DSOMM you currently have, Timo, but there's always a little bit of what we would call like trade-offs between a stable but also a changing maturity model. We are now with SAMM really in version 2, actually a little bit higher than that, but there were 2 major versions, 1.5 released like 10 years ago, and 2 released around 2000. What's the pace of change in DSOMM? Is it, I would say, the same glacial, I would say, kind of change, or do you iterate faster? Which I might assume, since it's more like aligned on DevOps.
Yes, I had some major changes where I had to add more levels because I had too many activities in the cells. So that if you have 10 activities in one cell, which you have to do with cell, I mean one dimension and one maturity level, that then it's too much, I feel, right? Because then you need to choose what of these 10 do I want to do. That's why I had to flatten it with more levels. So that was a major change for me. While I think minor changes which are well accepted are adding activities. That's very well accepted, I think, and that is expected that happens often. But these major changes, having a new dimension or new levels, that was something where I got bad feedback. I think that is because people are, as I said, building their application security program on it. And if I change too much, it's not a line anymore.
No, that's true. I don't know, Nariman or John, I would say from your end, what your view is on change versus stable maturity models.
I'd say, just quickly, I would say that the maturity model, it needs to be stable enough so that you can measure progress over time, and it's able to, depending on that window, what that timeline looks like, it's still relevant several years later, right? But it also has to be adaptive enough to remain relevant to that organization and to, rapidly changing technology. So finding that balance between the two, because if you start to build your program based upon what the model looked like initially, and then several years down the road, it changes radically. It becomes difficult to you may have to like restart your entire program, and that's a big investment for an organization to do. So I think that stability provides is a confidence booster. It provides that assurance that that model is going to be effective both short term and longer term. So I think it's really important. Finding the balance is important, right? With like AI just coming into play over the last several years and new changes and considerations that come into play with it. How does the maturity model adapt to that and remain relevant without changing radically and scrapping the whole model to do so?
Yeah. And I need to also pitch here that we did have like a previous podcast on AI and how AI potentially how we might need to adapt some to AI or AI related development. But I think the overall conclusion there was that, well, obviously AI has an impact on the ways development is being done nowadays, and potentially also provides different levels, different types of risk or attack surface. That all in all, the current SAMM model covers and caters for AI training and usage and development as well. Obviously, some language might be or needs to be updated in the next version, but it's true that over the last, I would say, 6 years, the model has barely changed. But we also did not have a lot of asks for change. And while we do plan some changes over the next couple of years, it's going to be an evolution and definitely not a revolution. So that's true. Nariman, and anything else to add from your end? We do have a couple of other questions as well.
Yeah, I think SAMM is often used to build AppSec program to structure it, right, in a company. And it's a long-term, it gives you a long-term roadmap. And it's great to look at it in a stable model that you can compare where you were last year, where you are now. And every activity in SAMM is very high level, like technology agnostic, uses technology agnostic high level description of what needs to be done. So you can use it in a very flexible way, and it does not have to change so often. While if I'm working with a DevSecOps team and I want them to check how secure is their configuration and what is their maturity, what they're doing or not, I'm totally fine to use latest and greatest DSOMM with all new updates that recently have been done, just to see what are we doing today and how it fits today's needs. And I think it's good that DSOMM is updated often, because my usage would be different. My usage there would be, let's work with DevSecOps team and see what they're doing. And if it reflects all modern threats and modern best practices, that's amazing. Then they can already prepare some roadmap for improvements, in my opinion. While SAMM, of course, it's low-level detail. It doesn't tell exactly what to do and at what controls to implement, but it's a bit gives you high-level guidance. Like, hey, do you have ways to see your supply chain? Like, what do you have? Do you have ways to? Did you think of ways to find the vulnerabilities? Yes, no. So it's a more high-level thing that you would do or not. And I think having that stable is more important than having DSOMM, let's say, stable for many years in a row.
Okay, yeah. Timo, any last viewpoints from your end on this?
Nariman said that DSOMM covers the full aspect. Every time I look at DSOMM, I see activities I would like to add, but I don't have the time to always add it. Just as a small hint, there is definitely ways to improve it.
All right. So if you're listening and you have some time to spare, help Timo to add extra activities. Yes. Then a rather open question here. So this is Aram who proposed these questions, but I think they're good to think through and to discuss a little bit how specifically you would do this with the maturity model, DSOMM or SAMM. How should organizations measure, but also communicate the maturity in terms of security? So security maturity. So is there something that you would say from a DSOMM or from a SAMM point of view? So let me know who wants to answer this first. That you think is specifically to the maturity model that would help organizations in communicating the maturity.
What I do in DSOMM, or what I like to do, is referencing to evidence. So evidence-based teams need to show how they implemented an activity. I also have to add that I only did it up to level 2. So I think if you do it for everything, maybe that's too much. But at least for most activities, I asked for evidence, and each team had to provide that. I assume it's might be different in SAMM assessments. At least in the SAMM assessment I did, I didn't ask so much for evidence.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, with evidence, I mean a screenshot, for example.
No, it's actually that it's in some there used to be different levels of thoroughness, if I would say it like that, to perform an assessment. I would say the so-called lightweight assessment was based on questions and interviews, where a more thorough way of doing a SAMM assessment, which is actually still possible to do, but I don't see that a lot because it's already good enough to do interview-based assessments. But there is definitely ways where teams or people can be asked for evidence to underpin their specific claims of doing or performing certain activities, to the extent that we ask them in the SAMM model, so that it can certainly be done with greater, I would say, efforts to make sure that indeed that measurement is actually that level is actually measured in the correct way. Nariman or John, I don't know what you want to add on this.
In my experience, like for the measuring part, very often we see SAMM, like especially if it's internal assessment, as an internal audit, and usually the person responsible for that product or responsible for the security of that product would have personal interest to understand how well they're doing in that product. So I would not, if I'm doing internal assessment, I would not go and ask for evidence for every question, because I have at the table a person who is not necessarily interested to cheat the system, and it's clear for that person that it's not an audit, that they need to create as much as possible. So I would if I ask for evidence, it's just to understand that we are doing it correctly and that my question and criteria is well understood. So if I say, are you doing this, and if they're not sure yes or no, then I would ask more navigating questions. Do you have that evidence? How do you do the threat modeling? Do you store it somewhere? Do you define security requirements, and where do you define them? Do you use general risks, or do you take some input from threat modeling sessions? So that's kind of looking for evidence, but the purpose very often for me that looking for evidence is actually helping to answer that question more accurately. But I almost never use it to catch the person lying there. Because the person I'm interviewing is usually in interest to have it as accurate as possible, to understand their own situation and have a better roadmap target as accurate as possible too. That's why I don't focus so much on catching evidence there. And for communicating, also, I rarely see that security leaders or product owners communicate to masses, to all employees, the maturity, but they use it to communicate upwards, up the chain, to show, or like between colleagues, like if you have different departments and they all do assessment, then and a shared call, they show where they are, what challenges they have, and they exchange ideas, etc. So usually it's at that level between security officers that they share it, or upwards, and it's then used for to support, let's say, certain initiatives, to support the AppSec program, etc. Or if they define a certain roadmap to improve certain activities, then they communicate downwards to certain departments of the DevSecOps team. Look, we need to do the SCA SaaS task here, or the product owners to define risk profiles and risk categories. But I rarely see company-wide like dashboards like how I would see normally for SCA tool or SaaS tool, because there you usually do have some like Grafana dashboards where the people can go and see what issues we have overall. But I don't see that for SAMM, to be honest, such public exposure. Do you see that sometimes in some customers, that companies have public exposure of maturity?
I have seen in organizations where different departments or countries, depending on the level of granularity, use a high level some measurements towards a certain target goal. So overall in the organization, they had to reach a certain level, and those teams or countries were held responsible to reach that level within a certain time frame. So that was really used for dashboarding, but also obviously there the goal was to reach a certain level of maturity across the board. And so that was really used as a management tool for those countries to make sure that they got there, and dashboarding that with the different countries included made it a little bit of a competition, but also nobody wanted to be last. So that helped a little bit. In the end, the maturity is not the goal. We want to make more secure products, that's for sure. But by measuring something, immediately people potentially, or organizations potentially, might start to gamify a little bit the underlying mechanisms. That is something we need to realize. Maybe because we have 10 more minutes left.
I would like to also mention that the evidence-based I use in an application security program, not in a benchmark. In a benchmark, I would also do interview style. So just that we have it. So in an interview, I think evidence-based is not the right thing.
No, indeed. In general, when we do these assessments, it's to help a certain team or people to get better at in their way of working. Yes, but yeah, they might be used in other contexts as well. One last question before we open it up for open Q&A. How do you see DSOMM and SAMM? Are these like competing models, maturity models, or do they complement each other? And if they would complement each other, how can they be used together effectively? Timo, I'll let you start.
I think they complement each other because you can in SAMM get a very good overview, which you can communicate to your management, not only the CTO. And what I'm mostly doing is I do my assessment based on DSOMM, and then I just translate it to SAMM because I have a mapping, right? So I directly get the outcome for SAMM also, and then I can choose which way I use to give it to developers. When I talk with developers, I rather use DSOMM. When I want to talk to the board, then I might use SAMM.
Okay, I think that's a very, very good way. So effectively, you see them as complementary and to be used together. You base yourself on the mapping.
Yes.
All right. Nariman or John?
Yeah, it's the biggest difference is level of detail, right? Like if you look at DSOMM, did you configure this and these controls on container level? Did you remove the root access at container? That is very interesting to show to DevSecOps people, developers, so they know like what they potentially could do, how much they're actually doing. That's what's very interesting in their context. When you speak with less technical people, that gives less information for them. Then they want to have a bigger picture. Okay, like how secure is my build? How secure is my deployment? How secure is my governance, or let's say culture side of it, and operations. So that at some level, just having less details, less technical terminology, it's actually useful then for a better dialogue with leadership teams to discuss on a high level what should be our direction, where you want to improve. So when I would talk with a IT management, development manager, security manager, product owner, C-level, SAMM is a tool for me. It's much better, of course.
All right. Okay. So what I propose that we do is that we're going to wrap up I would say, the recorded part of the podcast here. So in the future, so if you're listening to the podcast here, what we do when we do these podcasts as part of the community calls is we open it up for live Q&A, but we don't record that because it opens. We want to cater for a more open and a stress-free way of communicating. So if you want to join one of our future podcasts or community calls, do join us. It's every second Wednesday of the month. So with that, thank you for joining, and I'm going to stop the recording. A couple of like practical aspects how to keep and stay in touch with us. There's a couple of URLs hidden behind these QR codes. So if you're wary of them, you can find these links at the bottom of owaspsam.org. But we have a Slack channel where I would highly recommend that you join that. That's where most of our community questions and Q&A are actually happening. For the moment, we still have Meetup. So if you want to get updates on upcoming community calls, it's still valid to use that. It might be that Meetup would be replaced over in the next couple of months, but we'll definitely inform you. We do record a lot of these sessions and post them on our YouTube channel. And to make sure that you get updates on any upcoming activities or stay up to date in terms of like SAMM related activities, make sure to register for our newsletter, which is totally spam-free guaranteed. And with that, I thank you for joining and hopefully see you next time in one of our community calls.